Well, good morning, everybody. Hey, it is great to see you guys here. For those of you who are joining us in person, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. For those of you watching online, we're also glad you're here. We know several of you are traveling and on vacation this week, so we're just happy that you are joining us virtually as well. Today is a good day, right? Yes. Hey, there's rain in the forecast, and where some places that's gloomy. Look, I'm not going to complain about a little moisture. You guys? So it's like a 50% chance, and I think we need to pray that up a little bit. I need a 100% chance. Today we are going to jump back into this series where we've been talking about this idea of rest, and this idea of Sabbath rest, because the truth is we all need rest at some point. Like we all hit that limit and hit that wall at some level. I don't know about you guys, but when I watch sports where there are these like superstar athletes that play the entire game and like never like in basketball, they never once touch the bench. They're in for every moment of that game. Or in soccer, I don't know how many soccer fans we have. I love soccer, right? It is a 90-minute game plus some extra, depending. And you're only allowed a limited number of substitutions. Before COVID rules, it was only 3. Everyone else on your team plays the whole game. Soccer players are exhausted, right? And they just go and go and go. And you see that the 3 like subs that actually get pulled out are the ones that have to have rest. Either their conditioning's not there, they're old, or they're young, or for one reason or another, they've got to have rest. Me, I was not the Michael Jordan who played every second of the basketball game. I was the kid who went in the game, and I ran up and down the court like twice in 7th grade, and I was like, all right, coach, I need a water break, coach. I need some rest, coach. I've done a lot here. I didn't score any, but I really tried hard. That is the extent of my basketball career, right? I could not go the entire game without rest. There is never a time that I am more keenly aware of my need for rest than when I am doing physical activity that is beyond my means. You know what I mean? It's like, I think I can hike that. Like, nope, can't hike that. No, we should turn around and go back down. I just need to sit here and take a break. I know it was only like 5 minutes since the last break, but I really need another break. Right? We all need rest. You were designed to rest. I was designed to rest. That is how we were created. Most of us in this room are not superstar athletes. I know Steve's pretty close. He can ride a bike 100 miles. It's pretty amazing. I can ride a bike a mile. We all need rest, right? We've been talking about this concept, and we've looked at the Old Testament. Last week, we looked at the New Testament. So if you're brand new to the series, I want to go over this quickly because it's important for where we're going today. The first thing is that we need to know is that Sabbath is something that was created by God. On the 7th day of creation, God rested, not because God needed to rest, but to demonstrate for us how we should set aside time to rest. And then it actually is given to the people of Israel as a law, right? Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. It's one of the big 10, right? Can't murder, can't steal, can't commit adultery, right? There's only one God. Like, don't worship false idols, but like, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Raise your hand if you think it's okay to murder. Right, most of us have never done that. And if you have, don't tell me. Like, we have a security team. I'd love to introduce you to him. You'd really like him a lot. Right? But here's the thing. We don't break that commandment. We don't murder people. Everyone agrees? Yes. Yes, Joel, we don't murder. But how many weeks do we break that Sabbath commandment? And don't even think twice about it. What's okay? Like, I didn't murder anybody this week. So what if I didn't get any rest? We'll see how next week goes, Pam. In fact, Sabbath is the only concept of the 10 Commandments that pre-existed sin. Right? Sabbath was given to man before sin entered the world. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath, solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on that day should be put to death. We're missing the last slide on that. But that is, right? That's how serious the idea of Sabbath was. We see this in Exodus 31. If people didn't follow the Sabbath law, the law said they should be killed. And the reason why is because God created us to depend on physical and spiritual renewal, right? That is the definition of Sabbath, is physical and spiritual renewal. So just because you take a day off doesn't really mean you're having Sabbath rest. Even if you have physical renewal, are you having spiritual renewal with that? God gave us Sabbath to rest and worship. Now you got to get out of your brains like the idea that this is how we worship. This is one of the ways we worship, but it is by no means the only way, right? Recognizing God, spending time with God, individual time with God, right? Those are important things, and it's part of what we do on Sabbath. Now, for many people, Sunday is their Sabbath because worship is, for most churches, on Sundays. But Sabbath was created for physical and spiritual renewal. And that's how God designed us. We need that. And then we have Jesus who came onto the scene too. And what Jesus did was he continued to really expand our knowledge of this. This is what it says in Matthew 11, right? Come to me, all who are labored and heavy laden, and I will give you what? Rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And Jesus is saying, you want to understand how to rest? You need to give me those cares. Last week we read 1 Peter 3, verse 5. Something's not right with that. 1 Peter, where it talks about how we cast our cares upon the Lord. Later, Jesus says this in Mark chapter 2. He says, and he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is the Lord, even on the Sabbath. And that is something I don't think we really grasp enough. You see, often this idea of Sabbath is attached to this concept of legalism. And this is what we saw in the Old Testament understanding. This is how the Pharisees understood Sabbath. Is it had to be the strictest law. And what the Pharisees then caught the disciples doing was actually doing work on the Sabbath, which they were eating. And remember, Sabbath is physical and spiritual renewal, and food, we're going to see this here in a little bit. Food is a type of physical renewal, right? If you don't eat long enough, you have to eat, right? Fasting is a different type of spiritual renewal. Fasting and Sabbath, while they're connected, right, they're not the exact same. It's like there's a level of physical renewal that has to come with fasting. And what we see what Jesus does is when his disciples are called out for breaking the Sabbath law, he says that you're missing the point, guys. The point isn't the legalism of the law. The point is that Sabbath was created for you. God made Sabbath for you. He made rest for you. And you're working so hard not to work that you're not finding rest. You ever work so hard not to work? Can't seem to rest? You ever try so hard to sleep that you can't sleep? But here's the last verse of this, right? So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And remember, the Sabbath is a holy day. In fact, in the Old Testament, there's a covenant that goes along with Sabbath for the people of Israel. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week. But what Jesus is even doing with the Sabbath principle is he's revealing himself as God through this and saying, hey, first of all, these disciples, right, they're with me. He has a whole nother teaching to the Pharisees about fasting and how the disciples didn't need to fast because they were actually continually living in the presence of God. But he's saying, hey, yeah, the Sabbath, right? I mean, they're getting their spiritual renewal. But then he says, but look, that is for them. It's not for them to have to meet a checklist to rest. God gave them rest to benefit them, not to burden them. You see, Jesus reoriented our understanding. Sabbath was created for our benefit and fulfilled through Jesus. That's the point. And we find spiritual renewal by growing closer in our relationship with Jesus and by following his teaching. So we know we have physical renewal by taking the time that we need to rest, to get the sleep that we need, to not work, to not labor, to eat when we need nourishment. And then we find our spiritual renewal through Jesus. He's the ultimate fulfillment of that. We want to grow closer to God and to Jesus through our rest time. And we know that one of the ways that we do that is following the teachings of Jesus. So, like, what are the teachings of Jesus? I would love to introduce you to 4 books of the Bible that I think you should spend all your time reading. They're the Gospels, in case you don't know: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So here's my question, though, right? That's what we talked about the last week. So that's your recap, right? That was previously on Lighthouse Church, right? Now, I want to pose a question that I want us to wrestle through today. And this is the question: what happens when good things in life demand the time that we set aside to rest? And maybe a better way is, what happens when the worthy things in life demand the time that we have set aside to rest? What happens when something demands our attention that deserves our attention? There's another question that goes along with this. What happens when unworthy things that still demand our time take our attention? Have you ever had your time of rest not go according to plan? Have you ever had a vacation interrupted in a way you didn't expect? And I'll talk a little more about vacations here in a second, but has that ever happened to you? Let me tell you about my 4th birthday. It's one of my earliest memories, and it was traumatizing for me. I don't know what you wanted to be when you grew up, but when I was 3 turning 4, more than anything, I wanted to be the Blue Ninja Turtle, like so bad. He had the swords, he was the coolest. He wasn't dorky like the purple one. Right, if you want all their names, Donatello, like Leonardo, Raphael was the red, Michelangelo was the yellow-orange, depending on which TV show or comic you were reading at the time. Right, but Leonardo had the swords, right? He was the coolest. That's what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so for my birthday party, my parents got all this Ninja Turtle stuff and planned this great party. We were actually going to go, we lived in Birmingham, Alabama at the time. We got in our old Ford Windstar, and we're going to drive to my grandparents' house in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. It's where we were going to have my birthday party, except things didn't go according to plan. And our vacation got interrupted because that old Ford Windstar was a piece of junk. And I have this very vivid memory as a 3-year-old of a tow truck coming, and my mother terrified. As we all rode in the tow truck, she was terrified, which now that I think about it, I'm sure there was not like a car seat or anything in that. That my birthday cake, which was in the shape of a Ninja Turtle, the blue one, Leonardo, that was going to get messed up as the van was towed. And I don't remember the in-between, but I do remember my grandparents actually drove down to meet us, and then there was a hotel room, and instead of having my birthday party at my grandparents' house, we had my birthday party at some roadside motel. But you know what? I didn't care. I remember my dad reassuring me, I remember being worried, my dad saying, hey, you're still going to have a great birthday. But here's the point. My birthday and our vacation, my trip to my grandparents' house, did not go as planned on my birthday. And that is the reason I'm not a Ninja Turtle today. That was a bad joke. That was not in my notes. Right, but when have you ever had those vacations that didn't go according to plan? Have you ever had those, maybe it's not that, maybe it's your day off, maybe it's your time of rest that didn't go according to plan, and something interrupts it. And sometimes there's worthy interruptions, and sometimes there's frustrating interruptions that we can't ignore. When people die, we can't ignore those interruptions to our lives. When tragedy happens and strikes, we can't ignore those interruptions to our lives. But what happens when things interrupt our rest? I'm glad you asked, because we're going to talk about it. In fact, this morning, we're going to look at a passage that we've looked at already over the last 4 months. And it's the story of the feeding of the 5,000. We talked about this in a previous series, but I want to look at it from a different angle today. Because I think within this story, we're going to see elements of Sabbath and what happens when rest is interrupted. So we're going to jump in actually a little bit before this, and we're going to jump in. We've also gone over this passage in the masterclass series as well. But I want to jump in Mark chapter 6. Starting in verse 7, this is what it says. And he called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over unclean spirits, right? Jesus takes all the disciples, brings them together, and sends them out to do ministry. He gives them a power, he gives them authority. And it says, so they went out and proclaimed that people should repent. And they cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them, right? They're doing great work, right? They're on missionary journeys. They're going and proclaiming the gospel. They're casting out demons. They're healing the sick, right? And they didn't have a ton of stuff with them. They just went, right? They didn't worry about their packing list. They didn't worry about what they were going to eat. They just went. And it was a lot of hard work. I want you to jump down, though, to verse 30. And this is what we see in verse 30. So they went out. Nope. Goodness gracious. I thought I fixed all this. Let's ignore all those passages. There we go. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all they had done and taught. And he said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. See, Jesus recognizes that the disciples are tired. He recognizes that they actually need rest. In fact, one of the blanks on your notes there is Jesus recognizes the disciples needed rest. And I can't emphasize the importance that we need people in our lives to keep us accountable to our time of Sabbath. You need someone in your life that's going to be willing to make you stop and rest. Spouses, you provide this for your other. Parents, you provide this for your kids. But here's a problem: is rest is not rewarded within our culture. The go, go, go concept is rewarded in our culture, even for our kids. It's summer. How many things we try to cram into our kids' schedules? During the school year, they've got school, they got select league. When they get old enough, my parents made me get a job. I mean, we actually train our children from really early ages that, look, rest isn't something that you need. What you need is just to do as many things as you can and go, 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 go. And then we model that for them. When what would it be? What would it look like if somebody instead modeled Sabbath for us? How would that change how we parent? How would that change how we work? But then something else happens. Look at the end of this passage. It says, and they went away in a boat to a desolate place by themselves. And now many saw them going and recognized them. And they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. And when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd. And he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. Don't miss what's happening in this passage. The purpose for them getting in the boat and going across was to go to a desolate place and rest, right? It even talked about how the disciples were hungry, right? They didn't even have food. Many of them were without food and to the point where they needed that physical nourishment. But all of a sudden, the crowd shows up and interrupts their rest time. But it's not just that they interrupted it. Jesus allowed the time of rest and renewal to be interrupted. Look at this passage again, right? It says that he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach you. So does that mean that rest wasn't important for Jesus? Does that mean that Sabbath wasn't important? Well, we know rest is important because he told the disciples, hey, we're going to go to desolate places. But then he found something that was worthy of interrupting that. Jesus allowed the time of rest and renewal to be interrupted. So here's my next question for you. What do you allow to interrupt your rest?
Oh, lots of things.
What do you allow to interrupt your rest?
Stress.
Because here's what I see, is that Jesus allowed something with a significant purpose. People who needed a shepherd, people that needed Jesus, right? That interrupted rest. But the things that we allow to interrupt our rest sometimes aren't that worthy. In fact, we let our recreation often interrupt our rest. Sometimes we let our labor that we're only supposed to do for 6 days interrupt our rest. Sometimes we just let our social desires interrupt our rest. And hear me, God didn't say work for 6 days and then take a Sabbath and have it interrupted every single week. What Jesus allowed to interrupt the rest in that moment was something that required his compassion. Here's the thing, guys, we're all going to have emergencies that interrupt our times that we need to Sabbath. We all will. It's going to happen. The enemy has a way of attacking us, especially when we're trying to get that spiritual renewal side. But what are the trivial things that we allow to jump in as well? One of the ways I see this on a daily basis, at least for me, and maybe you're different, is I know that I need sleep. Science has told us for years that we need 8 hours of sleep. I don't often get 8 hours of sleep. And but here's the thing, right? There was a guy named Matthew Walker, who's a neuroscientist, a professor at UC Berkeley. And he tells us that actually not getting enough sleep, you know what it does to your brain? It inhibits your ability to create memories. So if you don't get enough sleep, you will not remember things. So from now on, everyone Saturday night, go to bed super early because you definitely don't want to forget what I say on Sundays, right? Sometimes people come up to me and go, hey, Joey, remember when you preached that? And I'm going, no. I mean, I believe you that I did. I had a pastor one time, I asked him, hey, when do you preach sermons again that you've already preached? And he said, I have a simple rule. If I can't remember it, and there's probably a good chance no one else can either, and that's the point where I'll re-preach it. It's a good rule. But here's the thing, right? If we know that rest is good for us, we know that we need sleep, and that's just one example. There's tons more examples of how sleep is we're required not just to have enough energy for the next day, but sleep, it boosts your immune system, it gets rid of bad neurotoxins that actually lead to Alzheimer's, right? Tons of stuff. But if we struggle with sleep and we're even committed, right? All right, I'm going to go to bed early. I'm going to get in bed and I'm going to go to sleep. And then for most of our culture, after we get in bed, what do? We look at our phones, or we turn on the TV, or we stress about what happened in work. And we do the things that actually inhibit us from getting the rest. Let me ask you this question. Is scrolling through Facebook or TikTok or Instagram something that is worthy to interrupt the sleep that your body desperately needs? No. Then why do we do it? And I honestly believe there's a reason. It's because the enemy wants to distract us with things without purpose to keep us from finding the physical renewal we need, but more than that, from the spiritual renewal that we need. But here's what happens when we allow our rest in that time to be interrupted and taken from us. We assign value to the things that demand our time. What do you value? Because here's really, and you may not intentionally be doing this, but subconsciously if you're going, hey, look, like Sabbath isn't important to me, that spiritual renewal concept is not important to me, right? That means that every other thing you do instead, you value more than. This one wasn't an option. It was a commandment. So what is worthy enough to interrupt your time? So here's the point, right? Here's what I want you to get at. There are things that legitimately are worthy to interrupt your rest. We see it happen with Jesus. We see it happen in emergency situations frequently. But before we go on to the next spot, this is what I really need you to grasp. You've got to fight for your day of Sabbath. You've got to fight for a regularly scheduled day to rest. It's going to get interrupted, but it doesn't mean you quit fighting for it. We all on the same page? All right, let's look at how we have Sabbath every day then, for when it does get interrupted. The passage towards the end, or a few verses later, says this, and when it grew late, his disciples came. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, this is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered them, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? If you want to know more about that, go listen to the sermon we talked about this passage a few months ago. And he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. And then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and fifties. And taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples and set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. When you look at this, the disciples' attitude wasn't great in this passage. They're not happy. But how many times are you happy when your vacation gets interrupted? Like you just think, oh, that's really what I wanted to do. Jesus, we just did this for weeks. And we did all of these things that you told us to do. And now you said we were going to go away and rest. And some of us haven't eaten and we're very, very hungry. Jesus, we're at the desolate place. It's time to send them away. Jesus said, what do you mean send them away? Give them something to eat. Okay, Jesus, what do you want me to give them? We don't have enough money for that. What do you have? A little bit of bread and a little bit of fish. Well, give them that. Well, no, give it to me. Let me show you. I love the end of this verse, right? Because remember, it talked about the disciples were lacking the physical nourishment, right? Some of them had not eaten. We just read that. But look at the very last verse or last sentence. And they all ate. Say all. Hey, who's all? It's all. You think the disciples are included in all? Huh. So do you think that they actually got some physical nourishment? Huh. You see, while the rest wasn't what the disciples expected, they did receive physical nourishment. Oh, and by the way, there was spiritual nourishment too, because if you didn't miss it, Jesus, God himself, was teaching. And he was like sub-teaching the disciples a whole different lesson at the same time, which is pretty incredible. And then look at this next passage. It says, and immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethesda, while he dismissed the crowd. Who dismissed the crowd? Where were the disciples? See, before even Jesus dismissed the crowd, he dismissed the disciples. And look, it may not have been what they were looking for their time of physical rest. It may not have been what they envisioned in their heads. But don't miss the fact that they received spiritual and physical renewal. Now, they were about to get in a boat and be tossed around, and it was about to be bad, and then Jesus was going to walk on water. And we could keep on teaching on that today. But he still dismissed them before he dismissed the crowd. He gave them the break. He gave them physical nourishment. He gave them a moment of physical rest. But then look what he did after this. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray by himself. That's an interesting passage, because here's what we see. The disciples' time of rest was interrupted, but they were given a bit of it. Jesus didn't take a full day to pray. He took an evening as he looked over the disciples as they were getting in the boat and starting to cross the lake. He didn't take a full day, but he still took time. So we see that Jesus went away by himself to pray, and this is actually not something that is abnormal for Jesus. Because we see him do this again and again. In Mark 1:35, it says, "And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed." Luke 5:16, "But he would withdraw to desolate places and pray." Mark 4:37-38, "And a great windstorm arose, and waves were breaking into the boat, so the boat was already filling. But he was at the stern, asleep on a cushion. And they woke him, saying, 'Teacher, do you not care if we perish?' And Jesus is like, 'Well, I was just taking a break.'" Right? We see this again and again and again with Jesus. He takes these moments of Sabbath for physical rest. He takes a break in spiritual renewal. He's praying. He sleeps there in the middle of a thunderstorm on a boat without a roof. He is soaked probably at this point. But he's still taking that time. So here's your challenge. Here's our challenge, is to find time throughout your day when you can stop and have a moment of physical rest and spiritual recognition. You want to know how to do Sabbath every day? Do this. That is not an excuse, hear me, that's not an excuse not to have a Sabbath in your schedule, in your day, every single week. But you know those weeks are going to come and your time is going to be interrupted. And so when your Sabbath is interrupted, it's not to write your Sabbath off, it's to find moments of it every day. But here's the thing. Here we go. Well, we like to take breaks, Joel, right? I mean, you work, we take breaks. Talking about the sport from the previous day or the previous night is not a break that counts as Sabbath. Scrolling the internet is not a break that counts as Sabbath. Right? It's physical renewal, but also spiritual recognition. If you're not taking time to reflect on God in those moments of rest, then you're missing the point entirely. There are just about 1,000 apps on smartphones that can help you do this. Wow. You can get a verse of the day. You can get the daily audio Bible. You can get all sorts of things that will help you take moments of spiritual recognition. But here's the thing, you've got to be committed to do it. And you can't use this as a crutch and as an excuse not to build in Sabbath every single week. We see Jesus do this when something worthy to interrupt him, he allowed to interrupt him. He didn't replace the Sabbath with this. When I was 15, I got my first job in a restaurant, and then for the next 7-8 years, I worked in several different restaurants, all in the state of Texas. And something really interesting happened in the state of Texas. You see, there are labor laws, just like every state. And one of the labor laws says for every 4 hours you work, you are required to give your employees a 15-minute break. So like when I worked at a grocery store, I would work 4 hours, I get a 15-minute break, I'd work a couple more hours or however long it was. I think like at 8 hours, you got an hour break. But for every 4 hours you work, you were required to receive a 15-minute break. Unless you worked in the restaurant industry. You see, because the restaurant industry in Texas petitioned and lobbied to have an exemption created for them. Because you never know when people are going to come in and get busy, and you have to have people available. So here's what I found. If I worked in a restaurant, I was not given a break in some of the places I worked. They would always say, like, yeah, you'll get a break. Good joke. I remember in my senior year of high school, I was working in a seafood restaurant called Rockfish, and I was a cook. I was a line cook. And so I spent all my day like cooking fish. And if you have never worked in a industrial kitchen, like as a line cook, like I'm telling you, you are missing out on a different level of chaos. It is unbelievable. I don't know if I've ever been in such a high stress situation as working as a line cook. But here's the thing, I mean, we would go in, we would kind of get ready, and then all of a sudden these crazy intense moments would happen where you are trying to cook like 60 meals at the same time, and everything's flying, and it's messy, and it's gross. In fact, it's where I learned to cook, and so when I cook at home, it's also very messy, and my wife hates it. She likes it when I cook. She hates the mess that I leave. But look, I know you're supposed to clean as you go. I was never good at that. So why worry about it at my house when there's no health inspector? Just kidding. My wife's the health inspector, and I get in trouble when I leave a mess. But working in kitchen, I just didn't have time. I didn't have time for a break. So one of the ways that this restaurant they kind of made up for that is they would let us cook whatever we wanted to eat. They just would never give us the time to actually sit down to eat it. So we would make these elaborate meals, like crazy stuff, with some of the best food that I've ever, they would fly fresh fish in daily. But here's what I had to learn, is if I wanted to enjoy that, I had to take little moments. I never got to sit down, like put like the napkin over my lap, get like my knife and fork and nicely eat a calm. That was never gonna happen. They would give me food, but I had to fight for those little moments to actually enjoy it. Hey, I'm gonna take the trash out, and I'm taking my like dinner plate with me as I pull this trash can out. Right? I mean, this is what you did. Here's the thing, we fought for that time because we thought it was worth it, right? We wanted to eat dinner at some point, and so we fought for that. How much do you care about fighting for your moments of Sabbath? How much do you care about fighting for your day of Sabbath? Because here's the thing, guys, if you wait for your vacation to find your physical and spiritual renewal, you'll live 95% of your life burned out and spiritually dry.
Right.
That's not a way to live. It's not how you were designed to live. If you prioritize a weekly Sabbath, you'll be sustained and grow closer to Jesus. And when meaningful interruptions occur, and they will, or when emergencies occur, and they will, that is when you have to strive to find moments daily of spiritual and physical renewal. And this is something you even tell the person that is helping you be accountable for rest. So here's my question, or here's my challenge then to you today. Do you have someone who you're accountable to for rest? Do you have someone who's checking to make sure you're getting your physical and spiritual renewal? If the answer is no, right, you got a week to find somebody and ask them. Because I'm going to pose this question again next Sunday. And if you were in this room and you said no, and you say no again, I may stare at you from the stage. If it gets real bad, I may say your name through a microphone. I'm just kidding. I would never do that. Right, Steve? I'm just kidding. All right, so that's your first challenge. Find someone to keep you accountable to rest. And here's the second one. You need to tell them that if there are weeks that emergencies or purposeful interruptions occur, that you've got to find that time daily, and they need to be asking you that too. This week, I was having a conversation with a buddy who's just going through it right now. It's a really rough time. And he's the type of person that he wants to give and give and give to everyone else. And so he's trying to support everyone else around him. And he's giving him his time. So I asked him this question: have you taken the time you needed for your processing, for your heart? And he told me he had. But here's the thing. He also said, hey, I want to thank you for asking me that. Find those people that you need in your life that can do that. Find the people who can make sure that you are getting the rest and spiritual renewal that you need. You cannot wait for vacation. You will live 95% of your life burned out and spiritually dry. That's no way to live. That's not how you were designed to live. That's not how God intended for you to live or wants you to live. It's a fight. It really is. We have to fight for those times. But I promise you, it is worth it. As you find that physical rest and spiritual renewal that you so desperately need. It will sustain you. And you will actually be shocked how much you grow just by incorporating that one little principle of Sabbath into your life. Let's pray. Father, I thank you so much for each of the men and women in this room. And God, I ask that where we fall short of pursuing Sabbath, that you surround us with people who will spur us on. I pray you give each and every one of us someone that comes to mind right now who will keep us accountable for those moments of rest. And God, when those interruptions do occur, and they will, Lord, I pray that you, Lord, first, I pray that you just help us discern what is worthy to interrupt that time. And those things that are, Lord, I pray that you, Lord, spur us to find the moments that we need of that physical and spiritual renewal in seasons of busy and crazy and overwhelming. I pray that you surround us each with other men and women who can help us strive for that as well. I thank you for each and every one of those in this room who've heard this word and for those watching online. And I pray that we be a people that find spiritual renewal and physical renewal and pursue what it means to be the church of Jesus from a place of rest in spiritual growth. I thank you. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Amen.